Hey, great to be with you. And you can certainly find me at Jay Fuller Interviews on YouTube. There's a Facebook group, Instagram, and Twitter. Trying to feature the most interesting of interviews and bringing you the best in sports and sporting news, as well as entertaining you with some phenomenal guests. Tonight we have a great one. This is Jeff Pearlman. Jeff, how are you?
I'm well. I don't know if I count as a phenomenal guest, but I'll take that. Thanks.
You do, to me, very intriguing. I love your work. You're a fun follow on Twitter, and definitely my background. It's not a gotcha question, but I am a pastor, and I love your perspective, and I think it's great to listen and think about the different things life throws at you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so I just have a couple questions. You grew up in New York. And then you went to Delaware. And I remember when Delaware played the University of Vermont, Vermont had a chant called, what the hell's a blue hen? What is a blue hen?
Great question. A blue hen, the Blue Hen Battalion was a Civil War battalion, a Union battalion based in the state of Delaware. So there is a blue hen, and I know there are blue hens on the campus of the University of Delaware in Newark, but the mascot is after a battalion, a Civil War battalion. Good question.
Nice. Yeah. Why did you choose Delaware, and when did you know that you were going to pursue journalism, writing, and going into that realm?
So my senior year growing up in New York, I was either going to I had two schools. I narrowed it down to two. I wanted to go to Penn State, and I didn't get in. I got into Penn State Altoona, so you have to spend like 2 years at the alternate campus. I was like, no. Yeah. Then I wanted to go to Syracuse, but it was a lot of money. So it came down to Delaware and SUNY Albany, the State University of New York at Albany. Yeah. And Albany was a lot cheaper, and I know my parents would have preferred I'd gone there. And on the day I had to decide between Delaware and Albany, I went to look at the brochures one last time, and I could not find the Albany brochure anywhere. That's a true story. I could not find it. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to Delaware. And I would say 3 years later, cleaning out my desk, tucked behind a drawer, I found the Albany brochure kind of wedged in there. Yeah. And that is why I went to Delaware. And I knew I was interested in journalism when I was in high school. As a high school senior, I was sports editor of the student newspaper. And I really fell in love with it for the wrong reasons, which is I love the attention. And I would write a piece for the high school paper about why cheerleading isn't a sport. And the article would come out, and all the cheerleaders are gathered around you, yelling at you. And they never cared a second about me. Or I remember doing a story about the beautiful keyboard player for the school rock band, and I only did it so I could meet her. So the power of the pen I learned at a young age, and that was kind of my first draw to it.
It's funny how you mentioned that about losing that brochure. That was certainly before Google.
Yes.
How much has life changed since the internet happened? How much do you think it would have impacted you in high school or even your career choice back then?
I mean, the cliche answer is I think it would have probably got me in a lot of trouble because I'm very opinionated, and it's a lot easier to be opinionated when you're in your late 40s and you've kind of had a career established for you. But when you're 18, 19, 20 and coming up, I don't think places want to hire someone who's going to be ranting against the president or a political party or whatever. So I think it would have been a real tough road for me to navigate. I was not very mature as a youngster. I was not mature as a young journalist. I made a lot of mistakes that would have gone viral in the modern age. Like a lot of mistakes I made early in my career at the Nashville Tennessean were only seen by readers of the Nashville Tennessean. You make a mistake now, it goes everywhere. So that would have been very difficult for me.
Yeah. How important is it, though, to share what you truly believe versus I think we need to have some sort of tact, but I think it is important that we truly share how we feel. Where's that balance for you?
I mean, I step across it often. I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but the thing is, all right, so I have a daughter who's she's entering her senior year of high school, and she's become very, very sort of outspoken about certain issues. Her name is Casey. I'm very proud of her. And she's become very outspoken about, for example, the death penalty. We talk about the death penalty all the time. She just read a book, Just Mercy, which it's a great book, dives deep into the injustice of the death penalty and how many innocent people have been killed and the racial disparities. And she's really taken to sort of talking about the death penalty. And what I've been trying to work with her on is something I failed at a lot, which is you can see, it is important to see the other person's perspective. It is understandable why someone would be pro-death penalty. It is understandable why someone would be pro-life. It is understandable why someone would be wants more limited immigration. You know, like and you help yourself a million times over if you address the fact that you understand where they're coming from, you appreciate where they're coming from. It's not just you're right, I'm wrong. I mean, I'm right, you're wrong. It's I believe I'm right, but I actually understand what you're saying, and here are the arguments why I disagree. So I think it's very important and can be great to express yourself on social media, but I also think it's important to admit sometimes you're wrong, and also to admit that you can see another person's perspective.
Well, I think you're a type of person where we could be best friends because there's so much we disagree, but I think just the common ground, just being human is where it really matters. I want to switch a little bit and just talk about some of the books you've written. Brett Favre, now Aaron Rodgers, the drafting of a new quarterback, this seeming controversy. But before that, about Brett Favre specifically, what sports did you enjoy growing up, and did you play sports, or did you just like to write about sports?
Well, I was your typical little league athlete, but my one sport that I excelled at was running. And so when I was a kid, I probably ran 40, 50 races a year. But this is back in the day with a lot of 10Ks, 6-mile races, half marathons. And my parents would ferry me around New York and take me to different races, and I would compete in these different races. And then I ran track and cross country in high school. I ran a year badly of track and cross country at Delaware. So my passion as an athlete was always running, and I've run a bunch of marathons, and a couple of years ago, my back really started to bother me. So that was it for that. But I'm a runner. And I will say one of my great lessons in life was when I ran a year at Delaware. I was a walk-on. I was severely outmatched. I was had to be one of the worst 100 runners in Division I in 1990-91. But I stuck with it all year, and I stuck with it, and I took my beatings, and I kept coming in last, and I would get killed and blah, blah, blah. But I feel like for a year, I hung with a Division I running program, and there was something really, for me, very, very satisfying about that.
Is that similar to writing, where you just have to write if you want to become a great writer?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a great writer, but I think it's a profession that comes with a lot of rejection. I mean, I guess most professions do, but
Sure.
You put yourself out there a lot, and people tell you your stuff is not good. You have to. I mean, when I was at Sports Illustrated, the editing was intense. And there were a lot of times you'd write something, and what would appear in the magazine would be 10% of what you wrote. And that is very, very difficult. And you need to learn to deal with it, or you're not going to survive in this profession. I also think one of my keys to my career was always pitching, always pitching, nonstop pitching, driving, moving ahead, not always being the most talented or not always being, the most connected, but just always pushing. And I do think one thing my wife would say, like when I was in high school, this is a true story. When I was in junior high and high school, I ran for student government 5 times and never won. And I kept running, and I kept running, and I kept running, and I never won. And I would take these beatings in elections, but I just really thought I would be good at it, but I wasn't popular. And back then it was humiliating. And my wife has said to me, and I think looking back at a kid, she said, what kind of kid has the sort of wherewithal or the drive to keep running, even though he's losing and it's embarrassing? And I look back, I don't feel connected to that person anymore because it was so long ago, but I look back with a little admiration for someone who had that kind of determination.
Oh, no doubt. Hey, the gunslinger, Brett Favre. What was it about Brett Favre where you were compelled, desired to write a story about him?
I mean, number one, it's really interesting. He is an icon. Like Brett Favre is actually an icon. And I always say, like, an icon when you see one. It's a weird thing. Icons are great subjects for books, but what makes an icon, right? Like I would say Brett Favre and Ken Griffey Jr. are basically the same athletes in different sports at parallel times. Yeah. You think of Brett Favre, you think Packers, you think of Griffey, you think of the Mariners. They played for other teams. Griffey played for the Reds for a bunch of years. Favre played for the Vikings. They're Hall of Famers. They're legends, blah, blah, blah. I don't think Ken Griffey Jr. is an icon. I think he was a great, great player. I don't think he's an icon. So why was Favre an icon? Which I think everyone I know would say, yeah, Favre, of course, he's an iconic player. He touched people. Like he moved people. There was something about him and his grittiness and the way he would take a beating and keep coming back that just people can relate to in a very, Ken Griffey was just he worked hard, no doubt about it, but he was gifted from 18. He came from stock of Ken Griffey Sr., and Favre was just this guy from Mississippi, and he had to bust his ass all the time, and he took a beating and he kept coming, and it sounds dumb, but he cheated on his wife and he used drugs and he was an addict and he kept coming and he kept coming. And that was really appealing to me. That narrative it reminded me a lot of Walter Payton. Walter Payton was the same way. He kept coming, and there's so many obstacles, and he just kept coming. And those kind of stories really touched me.
And I think it's something that life lessons we can learn just watching the Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan. He had to keep, or thought he had to maintain, this facade of being everybody's beloved son. But then when the reality came out, I don't know if he would have survived this Twitter world. How do you think he would have done if Jordan played in this era?
I think he would have risen above it. But it's funny. I thought you were going somewhere else, which is I watched The Last Dance. I loved it. I thought it was great. But I didn't find Michael Jordan that likable. Like, I found him, it didn't seem like his teammates liked him.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how much joy he got from the ride. They always say, enjoy the ride, enjoy the ride. I'm not sure if he enjoyed the ride. It seems like he enjoyed winning, but he needed to win, and he would crack your neck in order to win. I don't think I'd want to be that way. I don't think it's worth it. I think there's so much joy in life. I always say, I have a book coming out about the Shaq-Kobe Lakers later this year. Kobe had a better career, but I'd rather be Shaq because I think he enjoyed the journey. And I think there's something valuable about enjoying the journey.
Definitely. The name of that book is 3 Ring Circus. We're going to talk to it about it in a little bit. When I grew up in Vermont. So it's just kind of funny, some of these things that you shared, because Ken Griffey, he played for the Vermont Reds way back when for minor league baseball. And when you're in 5th grade, you have to pick a team, and the Patriots were terrible when I was in 5th grade. So I picked the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
The Dallas Cowboys, was that just a high profile team? What's your affinity for them? And this book, Boys Will Be Boys. I mean, the glory days and party nights, that's certainly a compelling history for the Cowboys.
Not that many pastors reading this book, or maybe, but there's a lot in there, you have to talk about at church. I'm not a Cowboy fan. I grew up a diehard New York Jets fan. That was always my team. But when I think about book topics, there are 3 criteria I really have. Number 1 is, could I enjoy 2 years of reporting this book? Number 2 is, has someone done it and done it well? And number 3, does it have at least a chance of selling? I think the Cowboys, no one really touched that dynasty. There have been a ton of Cowboy books, but nobody touched that specific dynasty, that run. I really thought it would be fun. I thought the travel would be fun. I thought the subject would be fun, and I thought it could sell. And actually, all 3 of those points were right. It was probably my second biggest seller, I think. It was super fun. The characters are amazing. The thing I love about those books are, obviously, you have the cover there. Emmett, Aikman, and Irvin are the main characters, but there's so many amazing side characters and little people who came and went. And the thing I like about writing about football teams, a basketball roster is 15 guys. A football team is an endless string of people. So there are endless stories to tell. And I love that. And I love this book. I enjoyed it a lot.
So with football, do you find that there's more sources, or Jordan might say snitches, coming from the different players of the teams?
Fact, 100%. Because if you think about it, in football, it's not just the size of the roster. It's that they're nonstop throughout the season. There's a stream of guys coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. Your offensive lineman gets hurt, you sign an offensive lineman. Your quarterback gets hurt, let's bring in someone for 2 weeks. It's not like that in the NBA. You might have a 10-day contract here, a 10-day contract here. But in NFL season, you could have 100 players. And that gives me 100 players to call. Right, so if 20 of them say no, I still have 80 other guys to talk to. And the beauty of it all is, like Troy Aikman, who I have nothing but positive things to say, didn't talk for this book. All right. Well, 5 other quarterbacks talked, and they were there for the exact same experiences. So it actually works out really well.
So getting into the weeds a little bit, writing a book, everybody sees a finished project. How many hours do you think you spend on the average book? And where are the times where you feel like you're going to give up and it's not really worth meeting those deadlines?
So I've never had a book where I'm like, I can't do it. That I've never had, because I think the driving motivation is I have to eat. Like, I need food, and my kids need food, and they need clothes, and this is how I make my living. The hours, I've never measured it in, X thousand hours, but it's generally a 2-year process, and I go at it hard. I mean, my goal, and I learned from other writers along the way, it's an impossible goal, but my goal is to interview everybody. So if I'm writing a book about the Dallas Cowboys, the first thing I would do, one of the first things I'll do, is I'll take the media guides from every year I'm writing about. I will make an individual file for every single person in those media guides, and then I'll go about tracking them down. And I know they're not all going to talk, but I aspire to have them all talk and to record their stories. And the thing is, they're truly labors of love. Like, I'm not some of the topics have been somewhat controversial, people would say, but I'm not in the business of embarrassing people, making people feel bad. I just want people to remember the 90s Dallas Cowboys. I want people to remember the 86 Mets. It's kind of it's a joy for me.
And who are some of the mentors that you had, or who were some of the writers that you really looked at and tried to learn from?
Well, so when I was in first, when I was the first guy who hired me for any kind of job was a guy named Joe Lombardi, and he was the editor of the Patent Trader in Cross River, New York. It was a weekly newspaper. And Joe just taught me how to be a professional. He was my first boss. He taught me about deadlines. He taught me about writing. It was huge. Excuse me. And at Delaware, so when I was at Delaware, the New York Times had a football writer named Mike Freeman. And Mike Freeman now writes for Bleacher Report. And Mike had been at Delaware 6 years before me. And I used to read his stuff and study his stuff. I mean, word by word, just go through it word by word by word. And I started writing him letters. He was at the New York Times. I was a guy at Delaware. And he would write back and he would break down my clips and read my articles. And it was just a huge rush for me. And having a guy like that, who truly was my hero, engage with me.
Yeah.
I always remember that when people ask me for advice, I always try to remember what Mike Freeman did for me. So he was huge too.
Well, thank you. I mean, that means a lot to me. I think that might be part of the reason why you decided to come on the show, just making the time for the little people that are trying just to build an audience.
But that's the thing I just want to say, like, every now and then someone will say something really stupid, like, oh, I can't believe you took the time. Like, I'm just a guy who writes. I'm being sincere when I say this. Like, I'm just a guy who writes books. You asking me to appear, you're doing me an honor. Like, you're actually asking to talk about my books and to talk about my career. What kind of jerk would not do it? I mean, why? I have the time. I'm sitting here. We're in a pandemic. What else am I doing? Of course. I mean, I just think it's silly when people are like, oh, like, I'm happy to do it.
Well, thank you. I want to return to your childhood again. And what type of family structure did you grow up with? And how were you encouraged to pursue things that were difficult? Did you have a coach, role model, parent, somebody that really just said, hey, stick with it? Is that where you got that grit?
My parents were great. My dad, Stan, was a CPA, and then he started a executive search business, his own business. My mom was a probation officer. She was super tough, like I was inspired by her toughness and her ruggedness. And my mom was let go from her job from Putnam County, New York, and sued the county for sexual discrimination at a time when it was really hard. And that always left a major impression on me, on sort of my mom's toughness. And my dad, I'm trying to see if I have it here. My dad actually wrote a book. He self-published a book. I can't find it, called Conquering the Corporate Career. And he wrote it himself. My dad actually had a side gig. I don't know how much he made, almost nothing, writing columns for the local newspaper. And he put the columns together and he published a book called Conquering the Corporate Career, 1986. And I remember when the book came out, and it was, for me, age 13 going 14, I mean, mind-blowing. Like, my dad has a book. And we would go to the Jefferson Valley Mall, the Walden Bookstore, and my dad got his book in Walden Books, and it'd be in the business section. We would sneak into Walden Books, me, my dad, my brother, and we take his book out of business and put it in the bestseller section in front. Come back a day later, it's back in business. We'll put it in front bestseller again. And that whole experience, seeing my dad have this book and trying to promote it, I mean, if you take my mom's toughness and my dad's sort of entrepreneurial experience and zest, those two things were pretty huge for me.
Oh, for sure. Now, for you, having some New York Times bestsellers, what has that experience been like, and how proud were your parents just to see that you made it where they tried so hard when you were younger?
I mean, they're just really, really supportive and really, really good people. And they're all, my mom is funny. My mom, Joan Pearlman, is she's still, her and my dad are truly two of my three best friends. They're just, and my mom will not brag. Like, she just thinks it's wrong to brag. So she, and I share that. She will not brag to her friends. Her friend will say, oh, my son is a dentist. And my mom will never say, my son, blah, 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 blah. She'll express it to me, that pride, but she does not brag. And I actually love that. And my dad, on the other hand, is a total bragger. And my dad will tell people and say, this is my son, and he did this, and he'll send out the emails. But they've been great. For me and my brother, I have an older brother, and they're just they've always been, not to babble, but when I was a sophomore in college, after my sophomore year, I got an internship in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. I made $5 an hour. It was the only internship I got. I applied to 150 places. My parents let me use their car. They had 2 cars. They let me use one of their cars for the summer. My dad drove out with me. They paid for my crappy apartment for the summer. When I was ready to leave, they flew out and drove back with me. Like, that's my parents in a nutshell. They were just those kind of parents. Like, you could not pay for my college. Couldn't have better parents.
So funny you mentioned that, because my son's a senior, and I remember when I was a senior in high school going to college, I was the youngest of 3 kids. All 3 were adopted. But when my mom dropped me off my senior year, I don't know why they dropped me off my senior year of college, but anyway, she cried when they were leaving the campus. And I was like, Mom, you've done this I'm your 3rd child. This is my last semester. Why are you crying when I'm going to college? And I think we're just fortunate to have great parents when so many people don't. I'm not
also, don't you think, as like now that you have kids, I feel like you understand. I understand too the bittersweetness of it all, like the weirdness of being proud and also heartbroken at the same time. And I feel like when our parents were crying, dropping off at schools or graduations, we didn't have the perspective at the time to understand it.
Oh, that's so true. So true. I'm not going to talk about every book you've written, but Sweetness, I really enjoyed this book. This is, one of the books that I did read and do have a copy of. But this is my favorite book, Showtime, again, 5th grade in Vermont. I could not be a Larry Bird fan because everybody was. And Magic Johnson, man, he was just awesome.
Yeah.
The Showtime Lakers, you being from New York, is this just something that just, what drew you in? Just a story of being that team of the 80s?
It's very, very similar to the Cowboys. It wasn't a team I rooted for. I grew up a New Jersey Nets fan. And, but if just like the Cowboys, like, here's this team, and there's never been a definitive biography of their era. There've been a lot of books. Magic wrote books, different guys wrote books, Pat Riley, but there's never been a definitive of this era. And I just I remember being a kid. I don't know if you were the same way, but growing up in New York, especially in the winters, and you turn on the TV and you'd see, like, they'd show the Forum and they do that zoom in before a Lakers Celtics game, and you see like palm trees. Or watching, I remember like the Rams Steelers in the Super Bowl 1980, and it's Vince Ferragamo, a quarterback for the Rams. He's got the black paint, and it's in the Rose Bowl, and the sun is shining.
Sure.
There was something for me, just like the Dallas Cowboys helmet. There's something for me about LA and the Lakers and Magic with the smile and Kareem with the skyhook and Pat Riley with the greaseback hair. It was just magical. It doesn't mean I rooted for the team, but it was magical. And I really wanted to recapture that. And the beauty is now I live in Southern California in large part because I wrote that book.
Hey, it's a great place to live. I just wanted to call attention to your website, and if I can pull this up, 3 Ring Circus, your latest book about the new old Lakers, I guess. And you talked about wanting to be more like Shaquille O'Neal than Kobe Bryant, because Kobe, like Jordan, was just so driven. It was tough to know if he had much fun. Could you just dive into that a little bit more? Shaquille was an absolute monster, so maybe he didn't have to work as hard. But why do you think the Lakers struggled when they had so much chemistry, it seemed at times?
Well, I wouldn't say, I mean, they won 3 championships, so I would say it worked out okay. You know, obviously they were great. It's really interesting. I mean, Kobe Bryant came in. First of all, obviously, the thing that clouds this entire thing is the death of Kobe Bryant. And I wrote the book, and he died, and it was done, and he died. And, you know, it's the worst. It's really interesting. I thought 2020 was going to be remembered as the year Kobe Bryant died. And then we had a pandemic. You know, like the only thing that could kind of knock that off is a pandemic. I just think Shaq really wanted Kobe to want him. Like, Shaq really wanted Kobe to view him as the big brother. And he wanted him to confide in Shaq, and he wanted Shaq to take him under his wing and kind of guide him. And Kobe came to the NBA with a very Michael Jordan attitude. Kobe Bryant came to the NBA thinking he would be the best player in the NBA immediately, and that he could average 30 points a game. And he didn't understand why Dale Harris, the coach at the time, was holding him back and, you know, not starting him. And I just think Kobe's greatness, you know, of the athletes I've written about, there are very few. It's very rare that the best athlete is also the hardest worker. Walter Payton was definitely one. Jerry Rice, who I didn't write about, was definitely one. And Kobe Bryant was one, where they're the best athlete and they're the hardest worker. Kobe was just driven beyond driven to succeed. But I just don't think he enjoyed the journey the way Shaq did, the youthful enthusiasm that Shaq had. And in a way that's sad, but in a way I think it's how he wanted it.
Where were you when you found out that Kobe died?
I was in a coffee shop, and like a friend of mine named Amy Bass, who's a writer, just texted me and said something like, I don't know if you heard, Kobe Bryant died. Kobe Bryant died, or question mark. And I was like, I just, didn't believe it. Not possible. It reminded me in a lot of ways being a kid in the space shuttle Challenger exploding.
Yeah.
Where you're like, this doesn't make sense. This is not happening. And then, Googling every 8 seconds and finding out that it did. And it's just, the thing I like about journalism, and the thing that I think about with Kobe a lot, is people evolve over time. And the Kobe Bryant I wrote about in that book was a kid who didn't want to listen to anyone, who was very cocky, and he was all about basketball and all about winning. And he had the rape case in Eagle, Colorado, and there's just a lot of stuff there. And the Kobe Bryant who died seemed to be this really generous and genuine husband and father who evolved from basketball. And it's just crushing. I mean, what can you say? It's just crushing.
Did you have the opportunity to speak with Kobe when you wrote Three Ring Circus? Sadly,
no. I got Shaq at length. I got Phil Jackson for 8 hours. I got most of the teammates. And I was told early on, someone said, there's no way Kobe talks. He's just, it's two things, I think. Number one, he is guarded and he likes to control his message. And number two, I mean, if we're just being honest, like that Eagle, Colorado rape case was hanging over a lot of what he did during that time period. And if some guy's writing a book and that's involved in it, I could see not wanting to talk either. So I was understood.
Now, again, 5th grade, Vermont, I had to pick a college basketball team. I had an uncle who lived in North Carolina, so I picked the Carolina Tar Heels. Rick Fox, big fan of. What is Rick Fox like? The guy, I mean, I loved him when I was in high school watching him play, but it always looked like he was trying to date the supermodel, become Hollywood. Is that Rick Fox? Who is Rick Fox?
First of all, I'm disappointed in you. Why did you not pick the catamounts of Taylor Coppenrath and
I did after. I did. I'm 45, so I had to pick somebody before they got good because they were terrible. That was back when they had Eddie Benton, and he scored like 35 a game, but they won 5 games a year.
They also had a guy who died very young, and he was a really good player. I don't remember his name.
Kevin Roberson.
Kevin Roberson, because I watched him play because he would play Delaware. He wasn't an NBA player, but he was a very, very good player.
He was 6'7", had a tryout with the Charlotte Hornets and killed in a car accident. So pretty tragic.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
So Rick Fox.
Rick Fox, yeah, sorry. Rick is great. Rick is, I mean, he was married to Vanessa Williams. He definitely wasn't the most faithful husband in America. That was a weird marriage and not a great marriage. He was a player back in the day. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's preposterously good looking. Like it actually makes me angry how good looking Rick Fox is, and especially back in the day. But I will also say, like, a really smart guy. He was a glue on that team. He was really important on that team, like really, really important on that team because he was a sane veteran who saw the Shaq side, saw the Kobe side, tried to be the mediator between the two. Him, Robert Horry, Derek Fisher, Brian Shaw, those guys were very, very important and instrumental in that thing becoming something.
So Three Ring Circus coming out September. When you're waiting for the release, what goes through your mind? Like, how excited are you? What are some things that you wish you could control more of?
Well, it's interesting because that's a great question for now because I don't know what's going to happen. Like, the book is coming out in September. Will I be traveling to promote the book? I don't know. Usually your time is spent. You try to get on as many TV shows as possible, as many sports talk radio shows. You do some signings, you do events, you go to your hometown, you do the bookstore, blah, blah, blah. And it's just such a different world. And I've had a lot of friends come out with books over the past 2 months, and it's like getting run over by a truck. Usually, I always say it feels like a bar mitzvah or a wedding. Like it's like that, where it's really exciting. And the big one is when you're sitting in your house and the box arrives and you open the cardboard box and the book is there. I mean, that for me is giddiness. And then when you go to a bookstore for the first time and you see the book sitting there, giddiness. So, and then you're really nervous. You monitor Amazon nonstop. You keep clicking refresh to see where your ranking is. It's a very nerve-wracking experience. And then you're right back on the horse writing your next book.
So talk to me a little bit. You said refreshing on Amazon, seeing where your book is. Do you get caught up on Twitter, whether it's your mentions or people that comment? How do you balance the positive from the critical?
So I used to be really bad at this. I think most authors are lying when they say they never look for themselves on Twitter, see how people are responding to their book. I mean, you work 2 years on a book, you put it out, you want to see what people are saying. So, I do. I look. I used to be much more sort of combative with people, and I used to take things much more personally. Then one day something happens. I don't know, I'm 48 years old, right? I have a great wife. I have great kids. I've been able to make a tremendous career out of this, meaning tremendous as in I've been able to support myself and my family and really enjoy it. If some guy, Larry 283 on Twitter says this book sucks, I mean, it's okay. And also I used to get mad at the negatives. And then I think, well, I've complained about movies on Twitter. I've complained about music on Twitter. They have every right to complain. If they don't like the book, they don't like the book. So I've definitely mellowed a lot through the years.
I have a good friend that says that you actually want somebody that pushes back or stands up, because then it's what they really believe. If they didn't, then their convictions don't run very deep. So
I guess. But like, are you really going to go against every guy on Twitter? Like, to me, all right, here's the one thing I'll say about Twitter. If you don't use your real name, I'm not battling. I'm not arguing with you. If you cannot put your name behind your sentiment, you're invisible to me. And I think that's one area where I don't cross the line very often.
That's true. Hey, so I love podcasts. What is it about podcasts that you enjoy? Two Writers Slinging Yang podcast. When did this begin? And what is this, a fun hobby, or do you use this to really propel the other work that you're a part of?
No, it's definitely a hobby. It's I love talking writing. I love talking writing with other writers. So about 3 years ago now, I just started a podcast where every week I have a different writer, different mediums, probably 70% sports, but not always. And it's just a chance to talk process and, subject matters and break it down. And I've had almost all my favorite writers on there who are still living. And it's just great. It's done right here. I have a cheap mic, there's nothing snazzy about it. And it's really more than anything, just a passion project for me.
Who are your favorite writers?
Who are my favorite writers?
Yeah.
I have so many. I mean, Jonathan Eig. Yeah, Jonathan Eig, who's a good friend of mine, wrote the best Muhammad Ali biography that's ever been written. He's fantastic. Steve Buckley of the Boston Herald he wrote my favorite story of all time. This story long ago for Boston Magazine about a veteran who was lost at war. That's just awesome. Tom Verducci, who was ahead of me at Sports Illustrated. I was the scrub baseball writer and he was the man there, is one of the best ever. So people always talk about quote unquote fake news these days. I go to the Washington Post, I go to the Wall Street Journal, I go to the New York Times. I feel like the reporting there across the three spectrums, I'm getting good stuff.
Now, I probably should have done my research, but did you cross paths with Alex Wolff at Sports Illustrated?
Yeah, I just talked to Alex like a week ago. Yeah, I love Alex. Great, right? Oh, Vermont. Yeah, great guy.
Vermont Frosties. Vermont, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, one of the best ever. One of the best ever. A great, great writer and a truly, truly wonderful human being.
He certainly is. Hey, your next book, I have a suggestion. Jeremy Lin. Is that compelling to you at all?
That would be a no. But here's why. I don't know who buys it. He's just not. It's a tough set. You're asking a lot for people to buy. He never won anything. He had a great little run. I'm not saying his story isn't interesting. Also, I don't like. How old is Jeremy Lin? He's probably 31.
Yeah, he's playing over in China right? now. Yeah,
which is cool. I love Jeremy Lin. I root for guys like that. I'm a Delaware guy. You're Vermont guy. I root for guys like Jeremy Lin. I don't feel like age 31 is a life fully lived. And I feel like at 31, it was a lot of like, and then I did this. To me, the lives after they're done playing are really where the meat is.
Definitely. So what are you looking at to write or look into next?
I'm working on a book, but I cannot say the topic because I am super paranoid. But it's a good one. It's one of my favorites. So it's good. Yeah.
Now, have you thought about, maybe this is part of the case, of diverting from sports into another realm of writing?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to write. One of my dream books is a Tupac biography. Yeah. I grew up a big hip hop fan and I love Tupac. It's a little hard in this business. Like, you do get pigeonholed a little bit. And also I love sports. I love writing about athletes. I love nostalgia. Like that's my favorite thing is nostalgia, dipping back into a time period and sort of breaking it down. And for me, growing up, sports were my nostalgia point.
I certainly can attest to that. Hey, I want to switch gears. I'll get you out in a little bit. Jeff Pearlman, thank you so much for making the time. The current state politically for this country in a pandemic, it's worrisome wherever you stand. What are your thoughts and how important is this election?
I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, I wrote my last book was about a football league called the United States Football League.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump was an owner of one of the teams. And I was working on this book as Trump was running for president. And I'm a New Yorker, so I knew most people from New York did not have good feelings about Donald Trump because we just saw him as a huckster and as kind of a scammer and a carnival barker. That's just the truth. Most people from New York, it's not because we're a liberal state. It's because we know what Donald Trump was, huckster. This book about the USFL, and I'm not trying to promote the book, I'm just relating here.
Yeah.
Trump ruined that league, and he did it on purpose. He just was a greedy, selfish SOB, and that was his thing. So writing that book as he was running for president was super weird. And I kept telling people, it's the same thing over again. It's the same playbook. He's not a good person. He is not empathetic. He does not care about you. It is all BS. And apparently my warnings did not work. So I am horrified by the state of this country. I am saddened by the state of this country. I love America. I'm struggling with this in a major way.
And then in the recent news, Black Lives Matter. I've always said that all lives matter, but man, it's so evident there is something wrong with our society. If you were president or if you were king, how would you fix it?
I don't think you can fix it, but if you look at the Trump administration, there's one African-American of any prominence, Ben Carson, one, right? And they took the African-American guy who had nothing to do with HUD and put him in charge of HUD, housing and urban development. I mean, give me a break. There's no emphasis on diversity at all, on empathy at all. He never reaches out to the Black community. And I think, like I have my daughter right now reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. Before that, she read Just Mercy. I feel like those are two really good, important books from my life, from her life. And the more we stress diversity in education, I happen to live in Orange County in California, not a very diverse area. I had a thing happen, craziest thing happen, and it's so little, but it's so where I have a friend, she's African-American, she's about 5 feet tall. I have another friend, she's African-American, she's a former Olympian, she's 6'3". One of my neighbors who's white confused the two of them for each other. And it was one of the most awkward moments ever. But that crap happens all the time. And the lack of diversity, the lack of emphasis on diversity, the lack of education on diversity is very tough for me. So
I agree. Jeff Pearlman, thanks so much for staying up late, at least late here on the East Coast. 3 Year in Circus, the name of the new book coming out. Quick story, not to one up you, but I was giving a talk at a college, and the presenter thought it would be funny if he introduced me as Jackie Chan. And I just thought, and it's one of those things you kind of smile, shake off, but it's yeah, I understand with what you're saying, and you are a great follow on Twitter. Let me just pull that up again.
I do want to say real quick. When I was a kid, when I was a kid, I'm a Jewish kid, grew up in a completely non-Jewish area, upstate New York. And the number of Jewish jokes you would get, and my best friend was African-American, number of the Black jokes he would get. And it's not easy to confront. It's easier to go along. And I'm sure the Jackie Chan moment, the best thing you can do to avoid the awkwardness of it all is to go, oh, ha, ha, ha. Like I would do. Oh, ho, ho. But inside it burns. That stuff burns.
It does. I have a good friend. He says that people are ignorant, and you know if they're uneducated because they only talk about what's most noticeable about you. And my wife is 5'10", but if somebody said, oh, you have a tall wife, and that's all they ever knew about Bethany, they would certainly miss out. And I think we miss out too much on those around us and those that we call friends. But Jeff, thanks so much for staying up late and making some time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. That was great.
And again, jeffpearlman.com. You are listening to Jay Fuller Interviews, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're so glad to have different guests coming on. And I love the talk because it certainly makes us better as we're reminded of what really is important in life. That's hearing somebody, learning from others, and applying that faith that we have to personal application, what I believe being the hands and feet of God, reaching out and just understanding we are beggars, showing other beggars where to find bread. Anyway, we'll talk to you soon. Jeff Pearlman, check him out, jeffpearlman.com.